But I'll tell you, when somebody brings up their failures as much as they bring up their successes and their wins, right off the bat, there's a level of trust between the interviewer or the recruiter or the hiring manager, or whoever it may be, with the candidates. Because every interviewer that is spending time with a candidate knows that nobody's perfect because they themselves aren't perfect. They remember. It's what did you learn from those mistakes that really does help you, be more successful going forward. If you've never failed, what's going to happen the very first time you're faced with that adversity where you will possibly fail?
Hi, I'm Lorne Rubis, the host of Culture Talks, where we meet next-gen and emerging leaders that are solving the world's toughest problems and creating better workplaces. And today we have a real treat in having one of the top executive recruiters in North America, Les Gombik. And I'll give you a little bit more background about Les in a minute. But welcome, Les. Great to have you. And say hello to our audience. And where are your feet planted today?
Today I'm working out of our Calgary office. Thank you for the invitation, Lorne. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, so those of you that would be in the world of executive placement recruitment at the governance level, board level, C-suite level in Canada and many parts of North America, Les's name would definitely be a marquee name. He's been over 30 years in the executive recruitment business. I've seen his work. I've worked with him, and he's highly respected for his insights, his just deep understanding around listening to clients, what they need, the characteristics of emerging high-impact leaders, and making that connection between those leaders and clients that are looking for people that come in and can make a real difference. So, Les, I know that you have a deep background. Obviously, these 30 years you've been in as a managing partner at Caldwell here in Canada, but also the contributions you've made in the community and the way you just continue to be a business leader around the hosting forums and conversations around helping leaders continue to emerge and develop. So it's just great to have you give us a little bit of a sneak peek behind the curtain of executive recruitment today. And man, has it been changing. What the hell has happened? What's changed about executive recruiting over the last few years?
Well, first off, Lauren, thanks for those remarks. I'm going to save those and share them with my wife and anybody who ever doubts that I actually can do some stuff. So thank you.
You're welcome.
But yeah, you are absolutely right. The world has been shifting. And maybe just for clarity, I've been doing this nearly 20 years, but I was in HR consulting for 10 years prior to that, doing things like employee engagement surveys, leadership development, culture alignment, culture assessments, those kinds of things. So it all does flow very well together. And the last 5, 6, 7 years have really, really reshaped our world and what we do. But it actually started a little bit longer or a little bit before that, Lauren. It really did start to shift when LinkedIn and social media and the internet really started to come into play. Our business as an industry, years and years ago used to be all about who knows the best people out there. And companies would hire firms like us and even people like us and myself to say, hey, all the great leaders out there. Can you go out and find us a great leader? Well, now, ever since that LinkedIn era started to come into play and people's, names and backgrounds on company websites and just broader social media, finding people is no longer the hard part. That's actually the easy part. It's finding people who fit that has become the hard part. And then since COVID, that's just really exacerbated because the world of, call it that peacetime leader versus wartime leader, it's almost seemingly always wartime leaders now. and really how all that has continued to shift, literally changes every day. And, we can get into that in depth.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that because, now as you say, you've kind of really are sharpening your saw around this idea of fit. And, much of our audience are continuous learning leaders. They're trying to evolve their careers. They're either running their own emerging startups or beyond that, or they're in leadership positions in companies and looking to find their way forward. Is there any kind of sort of a pattern or a set of generic attributes that are emerging less in this world? You're saying it's like almost everybody is now a wartime leader. What are those characteristics that just absolutely are foundational that you're looking for?
Well, there's some new skills that I think have become more important than ever before, which we'll touch on in a minute, that I think are really going to differentiate the absolute best from the rest. But there are some fundamental skills that were important before and they continue to be important today and still even more important than they ever were. I would say some of those things that continue to be important are just the ability to, call it build followership amongst, the people that you lead. It's, in the past, oftentimes, in those buyers markets of talent where the employers controlled the jobs and then people felt lucky to have a job, employers could do whatever it is that they really felt they needed to do just to hit the bottom line, performance results. However, over time, that market has shifted more towards the employees. And employees now, it's a lot easier to ever find a job. I don't know if you remember, Lorne. I remember going to look for my first job, and I'd have my resume, and I'd knock on doors, and you were stuck with how many doors you could knock on, and who was looking at the time. And I lived in a small town. There's only so many doors to even knock on. Now you can put your resume almost anywhere instantaneously on any different site, and you have access to all of that opportunity out there. So why is an organization or a leader going to be able to attract somebody? It's because, they can build that, that followership amongst their people, because people will, oftentimes join a manager, not just a company. And so what is about that is that ability to do that is consistent through and through. And that's happening even more so nowadays in terms of why people will join and remain with a leader and an organization.
I love that that criteria of building followership. Because interesting, I thought you might start with, you got to show that you've had results time and time again, and I'm assuming that's obviously in the mix as a foundational. But it's a distinguishing thing when I hear you saying, has this individual been able to attract a followership? How do you determine that? How do you what's your, less Gombik way of checking that out, that that I've got followership?
Well, there's been a whole bunch of books written about interview tactics. One of the tactics that is employed out there is called the TORC technique, TORC, and that is threat of reference check. So oftentimes what will happen during an interview is you'll start to, people will say, hey, I'm the best, and I did this, and I did that, and I'm awesome at this. And you check out their LinkedIn page, and they've got every single reference under the sun. Well, the TORC technique really does start to pry away at that. Things like, well, that's interesting that you were there at such and such organization, Mr. or Mrs. Candidate. I know Joe, who used to be there right around the same time that you were. So if I were calling Joe, what do you think Joe would say about, your contributions at that time? And if the person is sugarcoating it, it's fascinating how backpedaling happens instantaneously during that discussion. Right? And in today's world of connectivity, it's not just the candidate that has access to knowing about the interviewer before they're going in, and the company to understand all of the stuff on Glassdoor and all these things. But the interviewer is pretty adept at usually being able to identify whether the candidate is actually truthful in all their claims and assertions of what they've accomplished.
So I want to follow up on this integrity thing, Les, because we know, and I mean, there's no such thing as, a perfect leader. In fact, I've got this concept that I've talked about, great, not perfect leadership, and try to be clear about that. And when you are, I love that TORC interview process. But when you're out when you're out discovering this, and someone says they're talking about their contributions in there, what are you looking for in that authenticity? Because you're not going to be hitting home runs all the time. But at the same time, you want to put your best foot forward, right? Like, what's the balance there?
Yeah, it's a fine line. But I'll tell you, when somebody brings up their failures as much as they bring up their successes and their wins. Right off the bat, there's a level of trust between the interviewer or the recruiter or the hiring manager or whoever it may be with the candidates. Because every interviewer that is spending time with a candidate knows that nobody's perfect because they themselves aren't perfect. They remember. It's what did you learn from those mistakes that really does help you, be more successful going forward. If you've never failed, what's going to happen the very first time you're faced with that adversity where you will possibly fail? And sure, there's going to be some people that haven't failed, and good on them. And if you can find those and they truly haven't and they're never going to fail, well, boy, wouldn't that be outstanding? But oftentimes it's those people that talk about what they were challenged with, and you start to believe in the real person as an individual, because companies are looking for people that are going to be able to work with other people. And if so, we all know those people that the blowhards and remember that old show Cheers, the Cliff Clavin that always talked about. For your younger audience, they probably don't know who Cliff Clavin is, but Cliff was the guy that just liked to talk, hear himself talk, and talk about all the things that he knew, or in his particular case. When you're hiring people, they want real live people that have learned from their mistakes and taken that to the next level so that they avoid those mistakes the next time around. And if they never talk about their mistakes, either A, they're lying, or B, they're probably not going to be a good fit in many situations because they're a unique individual on their own that nobody necessarily wants to be around.
Okay, let's keep going on this wonderful kind of this emerging sort of, some of it's historically foundational, some of it is emerging, right? So you're looking for followership, you're looking for authenticity. Obviously, people have got to get things done. What are some of the other characteristics you're looking for in these emerging, quote, it's continuous wartime leadership?
Well, right now, I think a really big thing, Lorne, is call it ability to deal with ambiguity. Right now, I was talking to a client not too long ago, and they were saying, hey, listen, when Mr. Trump first announced his 25% across the board tariffs on Canada, we, of course, as Canadians, in many cases, were freaking out. What are we going to do? And so very quickly, you could have instilled changes into your organization that moved you down a path to be able to quickly react. And many companies did. And then if you recall, all of a sudden, it wasn't all of a sudden, it seemed like forever, but in the grand scheme of things, it was all of a sudden, where that was ratcheted back, where if you were USMCA compliant, there wasn't any, it might just be 10%. Organizations could have very quickly tried to adapt and then found themselves making the wrong move because it just reverted back to the same. So you could have been seen as the hero, or if you made the wrong decision too quickly, you could have been seen as the zero, right? Yeah. So how do you deal with that ambiguity? Do you rush to conclusion and rush to judgment, or do you spend time to assess and determine what you do? And that ability to deal with those times of ambiguity of COVID was a really vicious time. We all remember it far too well. And it seemed to go on forever. And it did have some lasting impacts and changes in how organizations operate. However, in the grand scheme of things, have companies truly entirely changed and shifted? No. There's still a lot that's going on. So how did you make sure that you didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater at the wrong time? And it's that ability to know when to act, when not, how hard you have to adjust for some of those situations. And that ability to deal with that ambiguity is one of the most important things that we're seeing right now. So the other piece I would say on top of that we're really trying to see beyond that, seeing around the corners, is just that strong judgment. You're not looking for somebody who knows, always what the right answer is, but 9 times out of 10, they're going to make that right decision. Having a historical track record of having done that usually is a good gauge as to their ability to continue to be able to do that in the future. So when we're spending time with some of our candidates during some of our discussions, we're trying to understand, okay, well, what was going on at the time when you made that decision? Would you have changed that decision from what you know now? But when you didn't know it then, How were you feeling? What was going through your mind? How were you making those decisions? And I think the best leaders today are the ones that can figure out with limited information where things are going to land and are usually right along that path.
So that's such an important area to explore because there was a time when, there was leaders were expected to know more of all the answers, to have them all there. And now you're talking about seeing around corners, managing ambiguity, judgment, timing, being able to be highly collaborative to get the data, the insight, and then timing is so important. So,
People still want to have somebody to follow. They
yeah,
want to trust that their leaders know what they're doing. They want to trust that their leaders care about their best interests. They want to trust that their leaders are making the right decisions. So there needs to be conviction on behalf of the leader. Can't go in every decision saying, I don't know, what do you think?
yeah,
They need to be able to, to make decisions decisively and
right.
drive towards that decision and bring people along. But they can't force them along. They have to win them over. And how they win them over is the secret sauce.
Yeah.
It's showing them that, you've done your homework, you've done your research, you've made good decisions in the past. Come along, we're doing this and we're all in this together as opposed to just for the leader. I think that's the nuance that is required more than ever.
So I want to dig into that nuance because I know this is into your little bit probably of years and years of thousands and thousands of people that you've interviewed. What gives you a sense that that person has that just uncanny ability to kind of be confident and humble, be decisive and yet inclusive, to be what is that? Do you have any sense for how you're picking that up and as you're assessing someone?
Well, right off the bat, a lot of how they speak shows a lot of who they are. The we versus me. The more they use I, the more we question really how much was it truly that individual. But oftentimes you'll speak with people during an interview, especially people that haven't interviewed in a long time, and they'll say, listen, I have trouble talking about myself because this is a team sport. This is all about us. And we'll try and put their minds at ease to say, listen, now is your time to actually talk about yourself. But, those people, as you try to really get them to be comfortable in the conversation during the interviews, when you start seeing their default language, around those things and their examples and their stories of what they've done, you can tell when somebody has rehearsed an interview a million times. So they might have been looking for a job here for the last few months and they've interviewed a million times for various things. They're just giving you the pat answer. They've done all the prep work online, and now with AI and the recording of Zoom to be able to show you how good you are in those interviews, you can tell when somebody's been doing this. It's when you really start to unpack and you drill in, you drill deeper, and then you get into the story of, okay, well, so you left that company and you went to the new company. Who followed you? What do you mean, who followed me? Well, how many people came over to the new company with you? Well, sometimes you hear stories like, well, we had a non-solicit situation, so we weren't allowed to bring anybody, so nobody. Okay, well, that's one answer, and you start to go, does this person actually really build followership? Versus, you know what? I had 9 people that wanted to follow me and I couldn't take them, but as soon as that thing happened, they all joined, and boy, we're killing it again. Those kinds of stories, when you really start getting into it, really show whether somebody's just a really good interviewer or whether they're actually a really good leader.
So there's a lot of there's a lot of emerging kind of almost. I'm going to pick up on an article I read in the Wall Street Journal just the other day about everybody's replaceable. And they were quoting Jamie Dimon from Morgan Stanley, and Jamie Dimon had this expletive or a very kind of a graphic, profanity-laced thing where he told his bankers that he was pissed off and he wanted them all in the office 7 days a week, working 12 hours a day like he was. And a powerful guy like Jamie Dimon calls you up and says, Les, I want, we need some new leaders here that can kick ass and take names and go help me find those people. And how do you navigate that? Is that Is there room for, is there room for people that are still kind of people-driven leaders, I might say, that still get great results? Have we got room for people-centered leaders anymore?
Absolutely. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. And I think, frankly, with the advent of AI and where the world is going there, and I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later, that people centric leadership culture and model, I think, is going to be required more than ever going forward. But there, it's funny, in the past, in my very, very early days of doing this business, I'm embarrassed to say that I used to think that if somebody was out of a job, it probably meant they were the first person that was replaceable at the company when things went sideways, and they're probably not that good. I was embarrassed to say that I thought that when I very first started this over 20 years ago. And then I realized that very quickly that there's the right people at the right time in the right organization. And let's face it, the pendulum swings back and forth all the time. And sometimes people are better suited for different situations under different leadership models. So COVID has taught us a lot of things. And I think the pendulum swung far too left at one point, where companies started to have to say, hey, listen, you know what? We're losing our identity. Our young people aren't getting any of the coaching and the development because all they do is they sit on Zooms all day and they don't hear the sidebar conversations that happen around the water cooler or when we go for lunch together and we have those heart-to-hearts, one-on-one, that we can't really have when we're in a group Zoom meeting. And so, you sort of hinted at a story that reminded me of a conversation when you said Jamie Dimon 7 days a week. I remember in the early days of COVID, we had a client that was looking for a senior technology leader for their company. And this client, when we very first started the search, the candidate pool came and said, listen, what's the work from home, working remotely policy? And this company had this tongue-in-cheek approach of saying, well, we've got, a work from home policy. You're allowed to work from home 2 days a week, Saturdays and Sundays, as much as you want, right? But otherwise you're in the office. Now that was, that was half joking, but it was their approach. And right. You know what? For that culture at that time, for their organization where they had 95% of their people that were out in the field, those people couldn't work from home. They worked in front of customers or in front of their clients. And those 5% of the people that felt, you know what, I don't have to be in the office, I can work from home, it created a real culture sort of pain point in the organization that they had to do that. But I do think that what in today's day and age, those organizations that can figure out the why of their organization and the purpose of their organization, and they match the leaders and the team with the purpose in the best ways, those are the organizations that are going to be the most successful.
Yeah. I want to pick up on this in this way. A number of the people that are listening here are building their organizations, CEOs they're adding. And if you were on their board right now, and I know this is a little bit of a setup question, but I would like you to bring your guidance to this because they're going to make hires, but they're under tremendous pressure to fill a spot. Their investors are saying we need to go and, scale up faster, go get those engineers, go just get them, shut up and go get them. And you're on the board or you're giving advice to these CEOs about the cost of a wrong hire or the right. What's your guidance here? Practical guidance. Not everybody's going to hire Caldwell to go help them for recruiting for every position. But how the hell do they really manage this more effectively so they don't have these disappointments after that? The mistakes are so costly.
Well, the way I oftentimes think of it, Lorne, is A players want to work for and with A players. B players and C players, they can't attract A players. If you're, if you think sports, using an analogy, if you're a superstar hockey player, why are you going to want to go for a team and work for a team that is not going to make the playoffs or not have any prospects of winning during your time there? You want to go to a winning team, okay? So when you think of how you're going to build the winning team, well, if you bring in warm bodies, you're not going to be able to attract the superstars around those warm bodies because they're going to go, why would I want to be here? So especially in the early days, it's more critical than ever to bring in those A players, because you are going to not just have the misfire of that individual, but you're going to have the opportunity cost or the lost opportunity of all those other A players coming in behind them, because you're not going to be able to attract those A players underneath if you've got a B player in some of those positions of influence early days. So
Yeah.
especially those new organizations that are really scaling up, it's critical. It's game changing. It's company making or losing, company failing if they don't get those right hires in the right spots. So I would say, either wait longer or broaden the role or pay more or create a different title to do whatever you can to get those A players in right off the bat. And then what's going to happen is people are going to want to join. You're not going to have problems bringing in people down the line because those A players usually know those 5 other A players. And remember I talked about that followership?
Yeah.
They're going to come on board, and then they're going to bring those other 5 A players that wanted to be part of that winning team.
Yeah. Yeah, this is such an important thing, and I want to dig in deeper on A playing, okay? Because that's such an important emphasis around. So part of it is, let's just go for the traditional kind of bells and whistles. MIT, Harvard, Waterloo, I'm talking about, let's say, maybe technologists, right? They got all those bells and whistles on that side. That's the A side of, competency. They've demonstrated that they certainly have got the academics parts. Now, the A side on maybe the non sort of Stanford, MIT kind of thing on the attribute side. You talked about followership, seeing around corners, and dealing with ambiguity. What are the other A playing attributes that make up that full A picture?
Yeah. Well, remember earlier we talked about, somebody having dealt with adversity and overcome the adversity. Can't remember the book which was made into the movie. It was that astronaut that applied to NASA, I think, 20 times.
Hidden Potential. That was it was in Adam Grant's book, Hidden Potential, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Story.
And they went through the interview process with him finally when they finally talked to him. And the interview process was flawed because they didn't know the adversity that he had to get through to even get to that point. So I am not taking absolutely anything away from the pedigree that comes from being part of some of these great schools, great academic institutions. Frankly, the probability of success on average can possibly be greater on average broadly, but you do potentially miss a lot of potential other hidden talent that could be far more affordable by bringing in some of those people that maybe dealt with adversity, and where they came from to where they got to already shows so much more growth than those people that maybe started here and got here. Now,
Hallelujah.
right?
Yeah, and I'm so to hear you say that. Frankly, I've tried to really engage our clients in thinking more that way. I'll find that ability to show someone who's climbed through adversity, has proven it, that they've got this potential, that they've always closed the gap in the potential. And I think that rounds out the A player list so much more completely. Because to your hockey player example, since we're talking about being Oiler fans, and I know you are, Les, that a great hockey player is one thing on the ice, but also how that person goes about their business, how they overcome adversity, what happens when things get really difficult. It's those attributes that makes that player exceptional, that A player. It's more than just all that talent that you can quantitatively measure. It's those other attributes, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I want to use that now to add to this notion of collaboration in AI. So as long as I've known you, I know that how important it is that you say that people have this ability to really be good communicators, collaborators, listeners, all those kind of things. Now we've got this emerging avalanche of AI tools. So, how do you determine whether I'm a good collaborator with machines? And how important is that?
That's a loaded question and a very hard one. There's two schools of thought on AI. Some believe, of course, that AI is going to change the world for the better, and others feel that it's going to change the world for the worse. I'm personally right in the middle. I think if we don't harness this in the right ways, it could be bad. But wow, the opportunity is incredible. But I'm a relatively late adopter or adapter to to the various AI tools. But I gotta say, I've been trying to catch up really quick, thinking the tools are outstanding. And right now, as I understand it, when I talk to other people, it's how you use it and how you communicate with the various AI tools as a starting point for how you can actually turn it into something valuable in what it is that you're doing. But, it's years ago, it's just an extension, I think, to where, the internet has taken away a lot of the historical requirement for strong people, social, and communication skills with people that were required to be successful in business. And I think this is just now supercharging how much more important the ability to communicate and interact and collaborate and listen and empathize and care is that much more important, because pretty soon everybody, like I just think of my world right now with AI. In the past, I used to be able to look at somebody's resume and I could say, you know what, this person's attention to detail is not that great because it's loaded with spelling mistakes. Okay, well, now somebody just takes that resume, puts it into an AI tool and says, make this a really pretty resume,
Yeah.
and it's going to be world class.
Yeah.
So that's harder now for us in our industry, just as one example, to be able to assess whether somebody is good at some of those kinds of things. And if somebody just really does focus on those kinds of things and leverages the ability to work with the machines, they'll get really good at a whole bunch. But are they really going to be good now at the things that are going to differentiate them from others in some of these other roles in terms of their ability, as I talked about earlier, to collaborate and work with others in an effective manner? In terms of, we've got a team project, let's go and do this. Well, who's going to be the leader versus who's going to be the person that's going to go, wait a sec, I'm going to take this, assignment, I'm going to put it into, the AI tool and come up with a solution. I'm going to come up and I'm going to read it to everybody. How do you build those skills and how do you, strengthen that muscle that is caring and empathizing and building, building high performance teams? Those things, I think, AI still has a long way to go with.
I was thinking about this upcoming podcast we were having, and I was listening to Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, on a podcast. And I'm going to paraphrase, I think I've got this right, but he still does projects inside Google. Obviously, he's not running anything anymore, but he's active. And he's very, very active on the AI side because, of course, they're doing what they're doing with Gemini, what's going on. They're trying to stay right ahead of ChatGPT and everybody else. And he said that one of the questions he asked AI was anybody he's working with that might be a candidate for promotion. And the AI came back and said, well, you ought to look at so-and-so's work. She's phenomenal. And it came back and showed him a body of work. And he'd been involved with her, but he hadn't noticed. And I was so curious around, wow, is AI going to now, be there to give that other perspective around saying, hey, Les deserves a promotion. You haven't seen his work, but I've been I'm aware of his work. You may not be because you can't see it or you're biased or whatever, but I am. And what's your reaction to that?
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
And again, kind of nervous and scared while at the same time excited, because there's going to be times where that functionality or that tool becomes really important and speeds a lot of things up. But then there's going to be times where that's not the important part of the job. There's important parts, as we talked about earlier, there's different points in time for different organizations in good times, bad times, growth times, shrinking times, wartime, peacetime, all that kind of stuff. And depending on what's going on at the time, there's going to be different skills that are important at different times for that organization. I'll give you an example. Sometimes we get asked by a company to say, listen, we're having some tough times. Our competitor is eating our lunch. We need somebody to come in and give this company an attitude adjustment. Go and find us somebody that can really, re-energize and re-engage. Okay. And then I will get at the same time a call from that competitor who's eating their lunch saying, listen, we are killing it right now. We can't make a mistake to save our lives. Life is grand. We want to open and grow opportunities and people in these new areas because we've got all this extra capital to deploy, and let's go. Two entirely different skill sets required for two competing organizations in the exact same industry. So just because somebody's really good over here doesn't mean they're going to be really good over here, and vice versa. The AI tools are going to be good for different things at different times. But oftentimes organizations and economies and things shift, and we go through better times and worse times, and it's going to require an evolving skill set. And those who know how to use AI to be able to adapt more quickly to those things are going to win. But you have to show that adaptability and that ability to see around the corners to know before it's too late, before you fall behind.
So I'm gonna and that's very helpful and insightful. And I'm gonna go to a bit of a personal thing that I recall from a conversation you and I had a couple of years ago. When you said when you worked out, and I know you work out, you're an avid workout, you're always listening to books like at X or X. Like you are you just are like an absorber of books. And I'm assuming that's still the case. So you're interviewing me, and do you care would you ask me if what I'm reading, is it important? And what would you be looking for in my answer if you were asking me?
Well, first off, it's not about the reading, Lorne, it's about the learning. And there's different ways people learn. It could be about listening to books and podcasts. It could be about going to conferences and sessions. It could be about working with a coach or a mentor and always be looking for advice and, being coachable and doing that. But what I would be looking for regularly is not which book have you listened to or read, but more so, where are your interests and how and where are you trying to better yourself? Because the world is changing at such a rapid pace. And I don't know, maybe I'm just old now and I look at the world differently than I did, 30 years ago. But it seems like things are just moving way more quickly than they ever were.
Yeah.
And so how are old farts like me going to be able to keep up if I'm not following, the new trends and the new ideas? We joked a long time ago about how that young generation, the Generation Z or wherever they are now, that there was always this thought around, they're listening to this, they're playing with that, they're looking at this, they got 9 things going on at once. How can they actually pay attention to anything, and how can they actually learn? That was sort of the way I used, the old school way of people thinking about how that younger generation couldn't actually pay attention. Well, you know what? I think that some of those younger generations, because of all that exposure to all those different things, and they're capturing the important sound bites of all of those things, that skill has become even more important than ever in today's environment of 15-second snippets. And so that ability to multitask, that ability to continue to grab the best and the things that are most important in different places, that's what I'm curious about. And are they actually deploying it? Are they using it? And how are they using it? And then ultimately playing that forward. What's the outcome of that? How has it been used? And what was the result of the implementation of that effort?
And it is such an important place to, as we kind of go to wrap up here, Les, such an important place to kind of land on around. It's about the learning. And it's about the multiple ways and the multiple channels. And as you say, picking a snippet here and putting it together and connecting those dots. You're seeing around the corners, you're moving, you're building. It's part of this whole thing about this relentless, exceptional ability to continuously learn. Okay, so now we've got this, I'm just taking full advantage of having access to you for this, for all of our listeners, for the hiring side. if you were to wrap up the Gombik summary on the hiring side, wisdom in 30 seconds to the hirer, what?
Well, first off, you will likely spend a lot more time with your team than you sometimes will even with your people at home. So right off the bat, people want to work with and spend time with people they like. Right off the bat. It's a lost art, but trying to find people not that are just like you, because you need to surround yourself with people that, are complementary in terms of skills. But you want to find people that you like, but not because you like them as individuals, but because you like their integrity, their goals, their missions, their personal mission statement, their values, right? People want to work with you because of that. And oftentimes, if you're hiring people that are like that, again, earlier, they're going to be able to bring other people that are like that. So right off the bat, it's not just about the skills and the experiences that they bring. It's about who they are as an individual and as a person. Because if you're bringing those right people in, the rest of the stuff should sort itself out, in the grand scheme of things. Lorne, you were joking to me about, earlier about how much I read. I still have on my desk right here, this book that you gave to me, a few years ago, The Character Triangle. Character is top of mind for me. I truly do believe that.
I thank you, and with that, I'm going to just ask for you to summarize that again to just build on that character notion, and I thank you, Les, and I obviously I feel so strongly about character and the way you've described it in people that can build followership and all the things that really kind of demonstrates that they have it. But if you were kind of sitting down with your best friend or someone you deeply cared about the most, and you wanted to double emphasize a couple of those character attributes, what would be the Gombik sort of say, look, there's lots of things, but these things, give your energy to those. What might they be?
Well, first off, that old saying, right? If you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. Yeah. So, find a passion and find something that you truly do care about, and go about it for those reasons. The money will follow, all that kind of stuff will ultimately follow. You want to build a culture of trust. People need to know that, you care about them. You're not just in it solely for the bottom line. People really do want to know that you care about doing the right things all the time, not just when it's convenient. And if you are doing that and you truly do believe that, you're going to much more easily attract those people to come to you in the first place. You want to make sure that they're the same way as well, because as your organizations get bigger, you're not going to be able to oversee everybody on the front line, because they've got to be extensions of you, and then they've got to be extensions of the next person, got to be extensions. So you have to make sure that consistency is embedded throughout the organization for the future leaders in the business to come in. And then finally, I guess the thing that I really do think is, and it took me a long time to, even personally as a leader, I've got a team of people here working with me, and they would probably tell you, years ago, and they might still tell you now, but they might have told you that, what, it was just about, let's just get it done, and, rah, rah, and, well, you know what, it's not just about the rah, rah. It's actually about, we're all people. We're all, we're working not just to work, and some people are, but we're working actually, because in many cases we love what we do. So if you find the people that love what they do, that love doing it the way that you do it, and there's alignment in that, you're going to go far.
Yeah. What a great way to conclude this conversation. Look, for those of you listening out there, the most important decisions you make are the people that you hire. And you have to be the leader. You have to lead and be that leader that of the kind of people that you're kind of attract. My recommendation, you want some help with this, reach out to Les Gombik, and he's going to help you make your world a hell of a lot better in all kinds of ways. But Les, most importantly, thank you for just bringing your personal insights and all these. It's years and years of work to add up the things that allow you to do what you do. And thank you for bringing that wisdom to our group. And just look forward to staying in touch, and we're on this continual learning and development journey together. And thanks for being part of it, Les. Really appreciate it.
Well, Lorne, I thank you, and thank you for everything that you're doing. Frankly, our clients oftentimes come and ask us to go and find them unicorns. Unicorns, as we all know, are few and far between. And so your teaching of these important skills and areas of development make my life easier. So thank you for everything that you're doing too.
Thanks a lot, Les, and we'll look forward to those coming out, and we'll talk soon. Bye for now.
All right.